Hi, my name is Jennifer Howard. I am the owner of Facets Relational Care, and today I'm going to be doing a video on the levels of health for Enneagram Type 7. The levels of health, as I've stated in previous videos, come from Don Riso and Russ Hudson. It is an invention of their own, so I did not create this theory, but I've studied the theory and find it very fascinating, and also find it to be a pretty accurate depiction of each Enneagram type as it becomes psychologically healthy or unhealthy. So today we're just going to talk about what that spectrum looks like for Enneagram Type 7. I like to start at the bottom and work my way up to the top, meaning I like to start with the most psychologically unhealthy type of 7 and then work my way up to a more well-developed Type 7, okay? So we're going to start at level 9, which is the lowest level of health that any Enneagram number could be at. There are 9 levels of health according to Don Riso and Russ Hudson. And for a 7 that's at a level 9, the way that I would describe it is very simply a depressed individual. More so than that, I have noticed that 7s that have disintegrated to this point, it's not just depression. It almost seems like, at least to me, that there is an emphasis on self-loathing, on not liking the self at all. That's kind of a red flag for 7s if they make mention of something, if they seem like they're overly focused on the parts of themselves that they don't like, if they're talking about how they're not worth this, or they don't know why the rest of us would bother wasting time on them. Things like that. That's an indicator that you're dealing with a 7 that may very well be at a level 9 state of health. A really good example of this is Bradley Cooper plays a character in a film called Limitless. It's an older film. I think it's from 2013. It might be a little bit earlier than that. Anyways, fantastic film. His character in the film, I do not remember the character's name, but his character in this film is a 7, and pretty much through the entire film, I mean, he is just as depressed as you could possibly be. His character throughout the film does make some fluctuations in the levels of health, but he pretty much stays in the unhealthy states, which are levels 9, 8, and 7 for the most part throughout the movie. He gets to a point, especially towards the end, where he's at least capable of doing the whole fake it till you make it thing. But for the most part, he's a pretty depressed character throughout the film, especially right at the beginning. And I love his depiction of a level 9/7. I think he captures it perfectly. If you watch that movie, pay attention especially to the dialogue that he has with other people. He makes a lot of statements about how unworthy he is and how he's sorry for all the stuff that he's put all of these people through, and he doesn't know why anybody would love him or waste their time on him. And anyways, again, indicative of a 7 that's at a level 9 stage of health, which is, according to Don Riso and Russ Hudson, the most unhealthy that a 7 can be. Fantastic film. Watch it for that reason. So then we get up into a level 8 state of health for 7. I could not think of a particular example, real life or fictional, for this. So I'm going to paint the picture for you this way. A level 8 7, or I should say a 7 that is at a level 8 degree of health, in my opinion, represents a manic episode for someone who is bipolar. If you're bipolar, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're not bipolar, a manic episode is an episode that consists of an extremely high, elevated mood, racing thoughts, a ton of energy to the point that you can go days without sleeping and you can't tell that you haven't slept, an increase in impulsivity, not being able to control yourself, having urges to engage in dangerous or risky behaviors, becoming overtly sexual to the point that it is promiscuous, sometimes even dangerously promiscuous, kind of throwing judgment out the window, so to speak, if that makes sense. Anyways, this is typical traits of someone that's in a manic episode when they're bipolar. to paint perhaps a clearer picture for you, there are many bipolar people who have described, myself included, their manic episodes as feeling high. I know of one person that was interviewed in a film. It was a documentary about bipolar disorder, and it was called Of Two Minds. Great, fantastic film if you want to watch it. Anyways, they interview a man in there who used to be a cocaine addict and was also bipolar. And at one point, his bipolar symptoms had become so severe that he no longer needed the cocaine, because when he was manic, the high to him was better than the high that he got from cocaine. And again, he's not the only person that I've heard say things like that. I've heard other people, again, myself included, make statements like that, although I have never experimented with drugs to know that it's better. But I've always thought that, manic episodes for me, it's probably what it feels like to be high. So that is what a level 8 state of health for Enneagram type 7 would be. So we move up from there, and we have a level 7 state of health, for Enneagram type 7. This is when I won't say this is when the anxiety starts to really set in for them, because if you're 7, by the time you've gotten to this point, you've probably been consciously wrestling with some pretty significant anxiety for a while. But I think this is the point where 7s start to get desperate, and it turns into, it's almost like whatever they can get their hands on. It's just this constant overstimulation. There's no really discretion anymore. I think if it's a substance or an activity or just anything that will distract you and make you feel numb for any length of time, they're kind of all about it. You know what I mean? A ton of recklessness here, Fantastic example of this. If you have ever seen The Hunger Games, I so hope that I'm getting this guy's name right. It's Haymitch, he is the winner from an older guy, and he's the winner from previous, set of games that they had played X amount of years ago, and he ends up being the mentor for Peeta and Katniss. Anyways, he is a 7 who is at a level 7 degree of health. So if you want a picture of that, what it looks like, I strongly recommend The Hunger Games. He is a fantastic example of that, okay? So then we go up into the average levels for level 7, which is level 6, level 5, level 4. Those are the average levels for any Enneagram type. When we get to a level 6, I don't have a specific example, again, fictional or real, in my mind for level 6, but if I wanted to give you kind of like an archetype maybe for a level 6, 7, or I guess I should say a 7 at a level 6 degree of health. It's easier to understand that way, I suppose. I like to call this person the spoiled brat. And really there are many Enneagram numbers at different states of health that could be considered spoiled brats. But in terms of a 7, this is the 7 that has, again, probably started to feel the anxiety ramp up a little bit. They're not to the point yet where I think they're desperate to relieve that in some way, like we would see in a 7 who's at a level 7 degree of health. But they're kind of starting to get agitated, because it's kind of like, I'm really sick of dealing with this anxiety that I'm dealing with. And they start to get demanding and pushy and impatient. And it's kind of like people and life need to distract them and give them what they want, or they're going to have to put up with this attitude, you know what I mean, from the 7, hence, this is why I call them kind of like spoiled brats, because they almost get really demanding. And it's like, if you don't give them what they want or do what they want, or if life just doesn't turn out necessarily the way that they want, they can get pretty mean, kind of bratty. It's almost maybe to the outside observer, just a sense of entitlement, like, how dare I didn't get what I want, that kind of a thing. That's what we see at a level 6 degree of health. Level 5. A 7 who is at a level 5 degree of health, These sevens to me are the most scattered sevens. These sevens, they're kind of in this spot where they are still attached enough to their self-perception. In other words, their idea of who they are, okay? Like a healthy sense of who they are. They're still attached enough to that they've got some direction and some motivation for life, and they're still actively engaged in that, you know. But at the same time, it's kind of like the anxiety is present enough, or perhaps conscious enough is a better way to say it, that they're having a hard time really focusing and applying themselves to life. So it's almost kind of like, I don't know, it almost seems like they're really, really distracted. They're over here 1 minute and over here another minute. And so I feel like life for them is about bouncing back and forth between achieving what it is that they want to achieve in a disciplined, focused, strategic way, and managing anxieties and keeping those things at bay so that they can develop the self and live the life that they want to live. So the outward observation of that type of psychological state is, again, someone that's just scattered. It's kind of like, well, yesterday you were doing this plan and today you're doing this, and then a week later you went back to that plan. Like, what are you doing? What do you really want out of life? A good example of this would be Jack Sparrow from the Pirates of the Caribbean series. I'm sure that everybody has seen it. If you haven't, please see it, because it's like, he is a fantastic example of what a 7 looks like at a level 5 state of health. His character is, I mean, no pun intended, all over the map. You know, he's off on this adventure, and then that turns out to be a little uncomfortable, and it kind of jostles up that anxiety for him. So then he's like, forget that. And then he goes over here and he's like, I always wanted to do this anyway. And so he starts pursuing this other strategic plan, and he's really intelligent. It's not that he's not capable of applying himself and focusing and bringing these things to fruition, but it's like if he runs into a trigger that brings up that anxiety, he just abandons it and runs off to something else, which gives his character that kind of scattered look. You know what I mean? Overall. So that's 7 at a level 5 degree of health. When we go to a level 4, I don't have an example that any of you would know, but I have a relative who is a 7, and she's pretty consistently at a level 4, so I'm going to go ahead and use her. This is one of my aunts. Don Rizzo and Russ Hudson describe 7s at a level 4 degree of health as 7s that really begin to develop that appetite for variety and quantity. The words that Don Rizzo and Russ Hudson use are worldly wise. So in other words, 7s start to, as they disintegrate, they shift from really the development of self and being present and in the moment to the external things. But they're not out of control with it. They're very focused people. They're living regular jobs like the rest of us. You know, they get up and they do the whole 9 to 5 thing, and they have families. I mean, they're not people that have drug addictions or just get up and leave in the middle of the night to go on a road trip on a whim. No depression, no mood swings, nothing like that. They're just people that have just begun to focus on the external, you know, at the cost of developing the self, if that makes sense. So, I don't know, they tend to just get peeved when they run into things that really bother them. So, like in my aunt's example, she is a fantastic person, very intelligent, she's hilarious, you can talk to her for hours, she's a really chill person, she's cool. But if she has to wait in a line, she goes insane, you know. I mean, she doesn't lose her temper or yell at people or anything like that, but she will stand in line. Case in point, she was in line at a CVS once, and she goes and gets her groceries at CVS and Walgreens and drugstores, is what I'm saying, because she hates shopping at Walmart because she doesn't like putting up with the cluster of people, the grocery carts never work. She doesn't like to wait in line so these people can figure out how to do the self-checkout. It drives her crazy. She wants to get in and get out and get on with life because she has things to do, So she goes to Walgreens and CVS to get her groceries. And there was an instance last year when she was at CVS, and I guess the person in front of her was, they had some sort of issue at the register that was taking forever. And she was really frustrated because all that she had was like a case of Coca-Cola. And so standing in line behind this person, who I guess it took like 20 minutes to check out one person, and they only had one register open. And so she was going insane. And she got on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram while she was standing in line and was taking pictures of what was happening and posting about how absolutely ridiculous it was. And I mean, within minutes on all of her social media, she had just these threads of conversation going between her and other people about how ridiculous it is. And I can't believe it's going to take 30 minutes to check out somebody at a CVS and this, that, and the other. So that's just an example. She absolutely does not care about like driving safety or the law, things like that. I mean, she doesn't go out and like murder people, but when she drives, and she'll tell you this, her motto in life is she's okay with paying large amounts of money to save time and for convenience and for small pleasures. So one of the other things that she'll do that I think is a good depiction of what Don Rizzo and Russ Hudson call worldly wise type 7s is when she drives however she wants to drive. She hates wearing a seatbelt. She never does it. And she completely disregards speed limits. She does not care where she's at. And she has gotten, guys, I can't believe she still has a license. So many tickets. But to her, it's a joke. It's funny. She will get on her social media accounts and post every time she gets a ticket. And because she knows that we all tease her about it and it's funny to all of us. And so she enjoys kind of being the center of attention there. And those are funny stories that get her lots of attention, and she gets to make everybody laugh, and she loves that. That's a very classic 7 trait. So she's always on her social media talking about, hey, I just got another ticket here and blah, 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 blah. She hates flying because she doesn't get to stop and see all the sights, so she prefers road trips. And so she's kind of got this game going with herself to see how many tickets she can, ascertain in each state that she's in. So her goal, I think, Alaska and Hawaii excluded, is that she wants to get one traffic ticket from every state before she dies. It's just like her thing. She thinks it's funny. So just an example of a level 4 type 7. She gets up and she goes to work every day. She's a responsible person. She's a human rights activist. She's very, very much into all of that. She's got a daughter and a granddaughter, and she's constantly really, really involved with them, spends tons of money on them and all of that good stuff. She comes to all the family holidays. She's a senior person at her job, so she's got a lot of people that she oversees and that looks up to her. So there's not necessarily what we, from observation, would say is unhealthy. But again, it's just the switch from the development of the internal to the distraction of the external. That's what we see at a level 4 state of health with type 7. When we get to level 3, I couldn't think of an example. Well, I have an example, but I'm not entirely sure that this person is a 7. I may throw it out there. Tell me what you think. In my video that I did on the degrees of health for Enneagram type 5, I talked about Steve Jobs, and I told a story about him and used that to describe a healthy level type 5. I want to say, and I did say then, that I don't know enough about Steve Jobs to tell you what type that I think he is. However, I will say that from the very little, and it is very little, that I have read about him or heard about him or seen depicted in television or in film. My gut instinct isn't that he's a 5. I think he's a 7. I think he's a very well-developed 7. That's just my personal opinion based on very little input. And my first instinct when I was writing the notes for this video was to use him as the example for a level 3 type 7. And here's why. A 7 who's at a level 3 degree of health, and this, by the way, is in our healthy range for type 7 now. This is a 7 who is internally focused. They know what their strengths are. They still kind of have, I think, that really active mind, but they're very focused about it. They're very intelligent, jack of all trades kind of things. 7s know, you would be amazed, the things that they know about. 7s know a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of that. There's literally no social context that I think they couldn't integrate themselves into, because they just know so much about so much, right? So when you have a 7 that's at a level 3 degree of health, this is where they start to kind of work with those strengths and integrate that. This is someone that is very grounded, very practical. Excuse me. Sorry about that. And anyways, they're able to kind of take their different areas of knowledge and kind of mix them together and apply them to different areas of life. And they use that to propel themselves forward. If it's something that they're doing in a job, they can use all of those different skills and areas of knowledge to kind of develop this little, I don't know, this niche for themselves in their job where they're like the go-to person for this. You know what I mean? They're good at that. If it is academic, they could have a major, but then have this really interesting way that they specialize it, or the way that they emphasize it or apply it, because they're taking all of these different areas of study that they've had and they're applying it and kind of synthesizing this really interesting idea, that kind of a thing. Anyways, I think Steve Jobs is a really good example of that. But again, I don't have enough information to know if he is for sure a 7. That's just a gut instinct. So then we go to a 7 who is at a level 2 degree of health. And I didn't have a specific example for this one either, but again, I'll give you kind of another archetype. And the archetype that came to mind for me for a 7 at a level 2 state of health is the innocent child. Have you ever seen, well, I'm sure you have, and you may have been this child at one point. You know, when kids are really small, they're just in the moment. They're not concerned with other things. Everything for them is just whatever is right there in front of them. I think about, for me, or even my daughter, I have a 2-year-old daughter now, and Christmas morning for us, even last year when she was 1, I mean, it was just fantastic. She rips into all these presents. Everything is so exciting. The boxes are just as exciting, if not more so, than the toys that were in the boxes. And then when she's played with all of that, she wants to take all of the wadded up wrapping paper, and that becomes a toy. The Christmas bows have the little sticky bit on them. You know, those become things that go on the head. Everything is just so exciting. I mean, I could tell her, hey, I'm going to make some cinnamon rolls. And it's like that's the best news she's ever heard in her life. Everything is interesting. They're very tactile. They just want to engage in the environment around them and be present in the moment. And they're very optimistic. They're very joyous. Okay, very lighthearted people. That's what a 7 looks like when it's at a level 2 state of health. And it comes, I think, from a well-developed sense of self, because when you have a well-developed sense of self, that's when you're able to let anxieties go and begin to engage in your external environment as a differentiated individual, versus a 7 who's at an average level, who engages externally with the environment because they have not set themselves apart or developed the self, and they're trying to distract themselves from the emptiness inside. Does that make sense? Then we go up to a 7 who's at a level 1 degree of health, which is the healthiest level for type 7. Again, No specific example that came to mind. However, well, there is, but I don't know how many of you people are going to know this person. There's an author, and I have no clue how to pronounce her last name, but her first name is Shauna. It's spelled Shauna. Her last name is spelled Niequist. If I were going to guess, I would say it's pronounced Nyquist, but I don't know. She is a self-identified 7 on the Enneagram. Recently, she was interviewed on the Road Back to You podcast with Suzanne Stabile, and I think Ian Cron is the other guy on that show. Anyways, they interviewed her, and the reason that they did is because she has made a lot of strides in her self-development as a 7. And so I think they gave her like 30 minutes to tell her story about how she developed herself as a 7 and began to wrestle with the inner anxieties and the emptiness and the self-loathing and learn to discover who she was and to love that person and to be present with that person without any external anything. And she is a fantastic author. She has written a lot of books from the perspective of a very healthy 7. I'm going to read you some of the titles just to give you an idea. She has recently authored a book. This is her newest one, I think, and it's called Present Over Perfect. The subtitle is Leaving Behind Frantic for a Simpler, More Soulful Way of Living. I mean, that is a perfect encapsulation of what a 7 at a level 1 degree of health is. She's written 2 more books, I think. Oh, 4 more. She's got another book that's called Savor, Living Abundantly Where You Are As You Are. Again, a very well integrated 7 perspective. Oh, that's a cookbook. Never mind. Last 2. She has a book called Bittersweet, Thoughts on Change, Grace, and Learning the Hard Way. I love that, especially coming from a 7, because if 7s have life lessons, it's usually because they learn them the hard way. So, which is actually one of the things that she was talking about in her podcast interview as well, was how she learned a lot of life lessons the hard way. Anyways, that's a book. Last one, she wrote a book called Cold Tangerines, Celebrating the Extraordinary Nature of Everyday Life. Again, indicative of a 7 who's at a level 1 degree of health, right? So in other words, she is able to turn inward and has become contemplative and thoughtful. There's almost, I think, a degree of healthy detachment there for 7s, you know, like they're not so close to themselves that they can't see who they are. You know what I mean? It's like they're able to step away just a little bit and view themselves non-judgmentally. This, by the way, is what we're referring to when we talk about a 7 that's integrating into a level 5. And they're taking on that quietness, that stillness, that detached perspective of the self, that ability to view the self without judgment. You know what I mean? Anyways, those are just some examples. We're just about done. I want to say as we get to the end of this that I think 7s, out of all of the numbers on the Enneagram, sometimes I think they can be really, really hard to type, simply because when you take into account the entire scope of psychological health for 7, healthy all the way down to unhealthy, they're so vastly different from each other. You have 7s that can be quiet and contemplative, and 7s that can be energetic and extroverted, and 7s that can be depressive and melancholy. And they all look so different from each other that I think it's hard sometimes to type 7s for that reason, which is why I think it's so important that we need to understand the levels of health, not only for type 7, but for all of the Enneagram numbers, because it's exceptionally difficult to type if you don't understand that. I think that instinctually we all look for average level types, myself included. I have to really watch that. But learning the different degrees of health makes it easier to identify them, and it makes it easier to understand how to relate to them and what to expect sometimes. And it's good for teaching you not to take things personally. You know what I mean? Anyway, so those are just my thoughts and my observations for the levels of health for type 7. You guys know the routine, questions and comments and things. If you're a 7 and you would like to respond to some of this, things maybe that you thought were applicable for you or not applicable, or if you've had different experiences, I always love that stuff, hearing it straight from the horse's mouth. So you guys know the routine. Comments. Thanks.